Hey everybody, welcome to the Canadian Job Search Podcast. My name is John Ribeiro and I will be your host. I'll be interviewing recruiters, hiring managers, and experts to help you land your next job sooner. Just a quick reminder to download your high-converting resume template that's been proven to get you more job interviews at resumetemplate.canadianjobsearchacademy.com. And if this episode resonates with you, then remember to subscribe, comment, and share. Thank you and welcome to the show. Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. My name is John Ribeiro, your host, and today we've got a very special guest in Gino Moretti. Gino Moretti is a former director who used to work for one of Canada's largest telecom organizations. And, to tell you the truth, he's a close friend of mine as well. We've worked together for many, many years, and I'm so glad to have him here. Gino, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, John, thanks very much for having me. And hello to everybody out there. I understand today, John, you wanted to talk about recruiting and some of the things that I used to look at when I was hiring folks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. So one of the things, and, for the listeners that are out there, listening into this, today this is part of the Leader Series. So this is where we interview managers, directors, and VPs to understand what they're looking for when they're bringing people into the organization, because it's slightly different from what recruiters are looking for. And just to have, Gino, your perspective and your insights in terms of what you're looking for is something that's going to be invaluable for those that are listening. So Gino, let's just hop right into this. When you are in the midst of recruiting, actually, first off, let me ask you one question. Do you even like hiring people for your team? Is that something that, because one of the things we talk about day to day, this is, not necessarily your day-to-day task, but is it one of those things that you thoroughly enjoy?
Absolutely. It's John, it's one of the most important things. No different than, for those folks out there that have played sports, it's no different than setting up a team for success. Without the right people on the team and a good mix, you tend to run into situations where you end up with too many of one type versus another. And, you got to go in there understanding what you're hiring for, what you're trying to achieve, and more importantly, the time you're hiring. And what I mean by that, John, is if I'm hiring for a senior resource and I come across a resource that I may feel isn't going to stick around for the long term, but I have a strong bench of younger folks and capable folks, they just need someone to kind of get them over the hump. I may hire for understanding that I may lose the individual in a year and a half, because it's part of the strategy that I'm invoking at that time. So a lot of times recruiters will look for hiring for the long term. And, in a lot of cases, that's the right approach, the right way to look at it. Other times, though, you may have the best resource at your fingertips, and you may have a sense that they're only going to be with you for 2 years, but those 2 years will allow you to bring your folks that are up and comers to the point where they can take over. And those are your lifers, the people that you want and that you expect to be with you for a longer period of time.
Yeah, no, and that's true, right? So it's interesting that you talked about that, because one of the things we talk about is just, when managers and directors, VPs are hiring, they're hiring with a very specific intent and a very specific purpose. And it sounds like your purpose is, even though, you're going to bring people in for, a year or two, depending on, what your overall strategy is for your team and building up that bench. It's really around progression and growth. And actually that's one of the things I've always admired about you in terms of what you've been able to do with people within your team, is to grow them. So what are some of the characteristics that you look for, as you're bringing new people into your team and new people onto, we'll use your analogy, onto the bench? What are you looking for specifically? What kind of characteristics?
Well, I think first and foremost, what I'm looking for is a combination of, you want to get a sense of honesty. You want someone that is going to be in there and is not going to be afraid to make mistakes. Not that we're looking to make mistakes, but we will make mistakes. That's just the nature of what we do. The only way not to make mistakes is to not do anything, and that's not the type of resource you're looking for. So from that perspective, honesty, someone that is intelligent, obviously, a background in the area that they're pursuing is definitely an asset within the IT organization. But I don't necessarily, again, unless I'm looking for that skill set that says they have to be an expert at that time. Sometimes I'll forego a person not having the most experience in that specific area because when you're interviewing them, their ability to communicate, and communication actually is probably one of the most important. And when you look at communication, they need to be able to articulate both verbally and in written form. I'm not a big fan, John. You remember, I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint presentations and whatnot. I was more of an individual that let's get in a room and let's work this out. Because I think, the iterating back and forth and being able to communicate your thoughts and you always find that people will build upon something. So it's a lot easier to critique something and make it better than starting from scratch and trying to, develop something. That's a unique trait unto itself. So again, you get 2 or 3 people, and then the other thing that I look for, and again, going back to our history, John, I think you'll probably remember years back when we were hiring in the service desk back in the day, you try to find a fit. You want to build a culture within the team, and you need to know you can't have too many A types, as an example, or you can't have too many, people that are introverts. You need a good mix so that people complement each other's skills, and that actually helps all of them grow as time progresses. And as a manager, that helps you out because you got a good balance of skill sets.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting. So you've got a lot of good stuff there in terms of, hiring, honesty matters for sure. And I'm 100%, I agree with you. If you can't find somebody who can't be honest with sharing even, a failure with you, then, you're going to have problems when you have challenges on your team. So honesty matters 100%. Communication's the other one that I'm hearing as well. You got to be able to effectively communicate both verbally and, written, presenting. But also what I'm hearing is you have to have an ear, or you have to have a mind that's innovative and collaborative, right? Because it's, like you said, you bring people into a room, you don't necessarily need to start from scratch, but you need to, kind of take what's in front of you and then make that better. So that
absolutely
that collaboration piece is incredibly important. But you talked about culture, right? So when you're hiring, and this is more specific around hiring management, right? Based on your previous role as a director, you had to bring in managers to create that culture within your team. How would a candidate show you that they're very good at, building that, or taking what, you've got as a concept of culture and taking that and expanding that onto the team, especially in today's environment, right? With the pandemic and with COVID and things being remote. What would you be looking for, or how would you assess that somebody has the right culture and the right fit for your team? Because I know this is one of those questions that a lot of candidates are wondering about. How do I show that I'm a good fit for culture within a team?
So a couple of ways. It's pretty hard, and it's pretty hard to assess an individual in 1 or 2 hours. So one is situational based questions. So put under this situation, have you ever run into this situation? And if you have, how have you addressed it? How have you tackled it? Because at the end of the day, what we're looking for is, to your point, you want to be innovative. You need to be innovative. You also need to understand what you're hiring for. And I think, again, John, you've heard this probably a number of times. If I'm building a team, so if I've recently taken over a team that has challenges, needs to grow, has stumbled in the past, I think the first thing you need to do is assess what you have and what you need to hire for. Also, we've talked about in the past as well, like, the way I looked at things always moving into a new role, I don't know the people coming into the role. So I would basically give everybody an opportunity. I didn't care what somebody previous to me might have said about somebody. It was more around, okay, let me understand, let me see how this person operates. And then those are the types of questions you want to pull out of the individual when you're hiring. So as a manager, if you were brought into a situation where you're being brought in to fix an organization, you may be looking for a specific type of manager. Again, it's a builder. It's somebody that can go in, shake things up, get things started. But then you got to remember, if that person is in that role for too long a period, they may fix things only to turn around 3 years later, 4 years later, and feel that they have to, break it, because that's the way that they're built. They're built to fix things. At that point, you may need to bring in somebody that is more of a farmer versus a hunter. You've heard those terms before. So you want somebody to sustain that, because you've got it to a pinnacle. You got it to a point, at least for the next period of time. That doesn't mean you don't continue to iterate and improve. But that, to me, when I look at improvements and things like that, that's all process based. That's all how you set up your department such that when you find that there's areas that need to be improved, there's a mechanism to identify it and then ultimately rectify it. So again, it's really important that when you're interviewing these managers, you want to be able to get the sense of, one, what am I hiring for? And then two, start to delve into situational based questions. And a lot of times you've got them in your own background where you've been introduced and you've been hired to do something. And how did you approach it? And what worked for you? What didn't work for you? And then how do you bring that out in a question so that you can give that person the opportunity to respond?
Yeah, no, and that's fair. It's, yeah. So definitely, you know, the person doing the interviewing definitely has to have a clear idea in terms of what they're looking for. And then showcasing that through, you know, like you said, you talked about situational type responses, right? You know, this is what I've done in the past in this situation. And if you've never had a problem in any of your teams in any of the in any of the departments that you've worked with, then that's a red flag, right? Because
Absolutely.
Right. So the one thing that really stands out for me is, you know, for people who are moving, and, you know, some of the people listening to this podcast, you know, there are places in the world where, you know, you don't necessarily challenge management. So yeah, you know, at the end of the day, there's never really a conflict because you're told what to do and then you have to do that and that's it. For those type of people, what would you recommend, right? Because that's, you know, what would they need to bring into the room to highlight that they're capable of showing that, even though they worked in a former or, you know, in a past previous environment. And, you know, you and I, we both have, you know, tons of experience hiring newcomers to the country, right?
Absolutely.
So what is it that you're looking for in those people, especially for those newcomers? What are some of the things that they need to do to stand out, to be slightly different and kind of separate themselves from the rest of the pack?
I think primarily, again, it comes back down to understanding, well, as a manager, and I think today, especially in a multicultural type environment, one of the things a good manager needs to understand is to really zero in and understand what the cultural nuances are. Because they are different. I know I come from a European-based background, and, you know, over time, and what we'll find over time is you're second generation, third generation, very different than first generation. First generation are typically, like you say, coming in from places where they don't ask questions. They're told to do certain things, and they'll do it. Whether it's right or wrong, they're going to do it. I think what you need to do is have that conversation in the room and just see how the person reacts to that. So again, you don't want to come across as accusing someone of acting a certain way or working a certain way. But if you pose a question such that, you know, I'm your manager and I'm going to ask you to do something which you don't feel is appropriate, and it's going to have consequences. So how do you broach that conversation? How do you bring it forward in such a way that you're comfortable bringing it to your manager, and that your manager isn't going to take offense to it? So again, ask the appropriate questions. You know, sit down in advance, run it by your questions, run it by some of your team members, maybe of that persuasion, of that culture, just to get the sense from them. Like, don't be afraid to run those questions by, you know, other peers to say, hey guys, how do you hire? Because we all have different ways of hiring. Like I when I first started years ago, and I was hiring, you know, for you know, analysts as an example. I may have had a certain approach to hiring. And then as I transitioned and moved into a managerial role and then to a director's role, and then ultimately, you know, folks that are at a VP role, they're going to be looking for something different. So, you know, it's situational. I mean, you keep hearing this word from me, situational based. It's situational based hiring. So again, if you were coming to me, John, and you were saying, hey, and I got the sense that maybe I've got this feeling that you might be hesitant in bringing things forward, or, you know, being somewhat shy because your culture, that's the way you were raised. I would pose the questions and ask you, you know, point blank, hey, if I came out to you, John, and said, I asked you to do something that you felt that was ultimately going to, you know, harm the department or harm, the things that we're trying to do, how would you approach it? How would you bring it forward to me? And then, you know, then you want to coach it and almost have a coaching session within that interview, to, you know, if it doesn't align with the way you would expect North American, attitudes to kind of come through, or what you're trying to build as from a team perspective. And then the other thing that we used to do quite often is once you get by the first or second interview, if you're going to have multiple interviews, is bring in your team, the people that this individual is going to work with, and get their assessment of the team, because you got to remember of the individual, sorry, not the team. You got to remember this person is going to be working likely more so with his peers than he is going to be with you. So get their feedback, understand them. And if you've built a strong team, the team's going to come forward and they're going to give you their feedback, and then you address and you deal with it. If you've got a really good sense and a good hunch and they don't, then you have the conversation internally to figure out, is this something that we move forward with, or is it something that we look for a different candidate?
Yeah, no, and that's great, because that is, especially today's environment, right? Like, just, how to stand out, right? How to really fit yourself in. So those questions, right? And preparing yourself, for those that are listening, for those that, are taking this in, preparing yourself in advance to address some of those objections, to address some of those, what might be perceived as, challenges in front of you, even though you haven't dealt with those situations, just like Gino said, that's the elephant in the room. Just address it, take care of it. Even if you're not even asked a question, make sure you still address it and say, hey, you know what, you might have a concern around this, and this is how I want to answer this particular question this way, just to give you a sense that I can actually do what you're looking for. So there was, but go ahead.
John, just let me interject a second. The other thing you got to remember is that interview, that hiring doesn't end in that room. Mm-hmm. So as an example, if you've got a good sense that this person would be a great fit for your team, but there might be one or two things that you're kind of leery on. Be upfront when you're at the point where you think you're going to hire that individual. Be upfront and just say, hey, guy, we got 3 months, 4 months, depending on where you're coming from in Canada. Generally you've got 3 months to assess the individual after you've hired them. And be upfront with them. Say, here's what I'm going to be looking for. I think you're a great fit in all regards, but I really need you to focus on A, B, and C. And if you find that, that they understand what you're looking for, chances are they're going to focus on those areas, and you get a good sense as to whether they'll push through things, or they'll come to you and say, hey, wait a minute, you know what? Yeah, I understand you want me to work on A, B, and C. But I'm struggling with A. Can you help me? And that's what you're looking for. Ultimately, you're looking for somebody that's going to come forward, understand that they're going to grow, and where they need help, they're going to raise their hand. That's as a manager, I always look for that.
So this is great, and actually, I was dealing with, I was working with one of my clients the other day who, unfortunately, had gone through the entire interview process. They actually landed a job with an organization. And unfortunately, they got let go. And the sense is, what came down to it after the coaching conversation was, the expectations of the manager was that they expected more independence from me. Because it seems like, here in North America, especially here in Canada, whether it's Canada, the US, when you assign somebody a task, you're not necessarily telling them how to do the task. You're just like, just go get this done, and you figure out the way to do that. I just want to get a sense from you. Is that kind of what is true, or is that just a perception that I'm kind of understanding? And from your perspective, is that true? Are you just, here's what I need you to do, but I'm not going to tell you how to do it?
No, I think in that case, that situation you just explained to me, that's a failure on the manager's part. It's not a failure on the individual hiring. So again, depending on what I'm hiring for, if I'm hiring a senior person, then yeah, I'm going to expect them that they're going to be a self-starter. So you always want everybody to be a self-starter. That's a given. But if I'm hiring an expert, I expect, that person's going to know, 95%, 85, pick a number. But it's going to be a high number. And you're looking to them to move things forward. If that individual continually comes back, then you got to ask yourself, have they misinterpreted or have they misrepresented themselves? Are they, because the other thing we're very familiar with, it's very easy to put a bunch of letters behind your name. It's another thing to be able to actually live up to those letters behind your name. So, there's a lot of folks out there that can study really, really well and get their designations. But then, when it comes to practice, they really haven't had the hands-on practice. And that's where you really get, that's where where the rubber hits the road in all senses, or all senses, sorry. But yeah, again, I would say in that specific situation, John, I would, and if I'm the person that now has been let go and moves on and is moving on, I would take that as a lessons learned. And so when you're in the next interview with somebody, don't be afraid to ask the question. Don't be afraid to say, what is your expectation of me when I'm coming into the role? Because then, it's one thing to come into a role and understand, it's a good fit. There's another one that you're getting into the role, not understanding 100% what the fit is. But if you can ask those questions in advance, it allows you to prepare. So, or turn down the offer. It may come in and you may turn around and say, this guy's expecting to be an expert from day one. And I'm not that person. I'm just on my way up. So it's not a good fit. It's okay to say, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I've learned a lot from the conversation, but I don't want to let you down. And ultimately, I don't want to go through this exercise and only to find out that, it's not a good fit for anybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, both you and I think we've always had a consensus around making sure that we have the right fit. And sometimes having the right fit, you know what I mean? So sometimes you think you have the right fit, but it just so happens that when people show up, they show up a little bit differently and they're not necessarily the right fit. And you got to do it for the benefit of the team, right? At the end of the day, one bad apple, the expression, one bad apple spoils the bunch. So, but you're right. Just kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, you're right. For that particular situation, the person I was dealing with, that was a failure on behalf of the manager to not necessarily effectively manage the person to get them to a place where they knew that they needed to do some work and improvement. But here's another thing, and this is what I want to dive into this because this is the one thing I'm hearing from recruiters is important. And I want to get your perspective on this. When it comes to job interviews or when it comes to even getting a resume in your lap, how important is a referral?
Okay, so from my perspective, I always look for referrals, John, and referrals from people. I mean, obviously, if I knew the person and I like the person referring. So if I knew the person that was referring and I had a great deal of respect for that person, then to me that means that's a lot. That to me it almost means more than what's on paper. Because at the end of the day, assuming that that person you're hiring is coming into a role that he or she did a similar role that they did with the person referring the individual. Typically, I'll do the same. Just so if I refer an individual, I will not refer an individual if I think they're going to tarnish my reputation. Because at the end of the day, I'll feel that I'm letting down. Let's say I was referring somebody to you, John. I'd feel bad because I'd be letting you down. In most cases, if somebody comes to me and I value the person or I value the person that brought it forward to say, hey, I'll ask questions. Obviously, I'll say, here's the situation that I'm looking for. Here's the individual I'm looking for. Based on your experience with that individual, do you feel that they have the skill set and whatnot? It may feel like nepotism or whatever else. But in that case, I'm always looking for the best fit for the team. It's not the best fit for me. It's the best fit for the team.
Nice. Yeah. And that's, that's a great point, right? I'm not going to call it nepotism because you can't call it nepotism, but it definitely is from a referral perspective, because one of the things recruiters are telling me is, if you're actively looking for work, leverage your network, right? Like that's the place to start. In combination of applying for work, 50% of your time should be spent networking and connecting with people. So it's Absolutely. Good to hear that, a referral, because I know in some places in the world, a referral means a different thing, but I know here in North America, it actually carries a lot of weight. And like you said, if you get a referral from, somebody that somebody within your circle, you're going to be more likely to take a chance and interview that person or even give them, what's the word I'm looking for? They're already edified before they enter the room because somebody else has talked them up to you, right? So it does carry a lot of weight, and it's incredibly important to know that having those relationships with people that can get you the referral to get you into interviews with hiring managers and directors and VPs, that's going to carry a lot of weight. Otherwise, right? Otherwise, you're going through the standard channels, which today, aren't necessarily working, right? Especially with this pandemic, right? So based on what you've seen, and I know, you've hired, hundreds of people over the years, But what is, based on what you've seen over the last year, if you were to bring in brand new people, what would you be looking for? What would be some of those key skills, especially since a lot of us are now, everybody's working remote? What would be some of the top skills you'd be looking for?
I think you need to be a self-starter. You need to, because communications now is kind of diminished. So communications is now done by digital. Digital channels. It's less one-on-one, right? So, communications is a big one. Self-starter. Again, a referral would be big. And what the referral gives you, John, is history that you don't get in a room or you don't get off a resume. A person can put whatever they want on a resume and they may be able to talk, really, really well and you get a good feeling for them, but you never have that history that, what have they done? And truly, that's what an individual, referring an individual brings to you. It also gives you another line of questioning that you may not be able to ask that person, in an interview, right? So you can ask them some additional questions that you may not ask during that interview. But again, going back, what am I looking for? How do you present on?
Yeah. So just given where we are today, working in this remote environment, what would be some of the things that you would look for in a manager to be able to effectively manage their team and give you that sense that, I've made the right decision here by bringing in this person, given the environment that we're working in today?
Sure. Again, a couple of things. One, how the question, the line of questioning. How are you coping with the pandemic? What are some of the things that you're doing differently now that as an employee, as a prospective employee, what are you doing differently today? Because a lot of people are, starting to crack, and not in a I don't mean crack like, loony bin, or sorry, somebody that's having mental stress or whatnot to the point where, it's going to impact them and the way they operate. That's not what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at is, what are you doing differently? Some people, took to exercising in their basement. Some people, took to, in my case, that I've recently retired, and prior to, last month, what I did to change the way we operated as a team was we would have virtual meetings and we'd each walk in our own areas. So my colleagues, my team members would be walking around their neighborhood while I'm walking around my neighborhood for two reasons. One is you get the person out there, getting them, off the couch, off the thing, get their brain freed up a little bit, fresh air, whatnot. You want to ask those questions. What are you doing differently? How have you coped? How has it changed the way you work? And then understand how you're expecting that individual to work within your environment to get a sense for, hey, wait a minute, hey, this person's got some really creative ideas in what they're doing. So, hey, that starts to give you a thought of, this person thinks outside the box. This person is doing something versus, I just sit on the couch and I play a game and I do this and I do that. That'd be great for your mental health. Maybe that's great for you. But you haven't changed. You haven't, bettered the way you do things. You kind of just cocooned. That's not what you're looking for in an individual. And again, those are types of things that'll come out in an interview if you ask for them.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I really like that. Just showing that creative side with, how have you, and I'm just going to rephrase a little bit here, but how have you been growing throughout this whole thing, right? How have you been transforming? How have you been growing? How have you really become innovative to make sure that you're still managing? Listen, if a leader doesn't have strong mental health, the rest of the team is going to fall apart because things aren't going to be managed effectively. Things are going to be let go, and it's just going to be a constant struggle. So it's great that you mentioned, and I love that question, what have you learned or what have you done differently throughout this pandemic? How have you grown? What are you doing differently? Show me, right? Like kind of show me with examples. Like you said, going for virtual walks with your team, fantastic, right? Like it's just one of those areas where it's like, what, it also shows how you take care of the team as well, right? Like as a manager, as a director, one of the things you want to know is that your managers are looking after their teams. So their teams are, giving you the output that you need them to put out there. Because what I also find or what I've heard is that, expectations are higher today, right? Than they were, 16 or 18 months ago from the people working on the team. So how are you taking care of those people, right? It sounds like that's an incredibly important part.
Absolutely. The other thing to keep in mind, John, during the pandemic, it's like how how have you changed how long have you been, you want to get a sense of how long the person's been looking for work, and how have you changed your approach to getting a job? Because it has to change. It can't be the same as what it was before. So, what have you done differently? Like, you can't go knock on somebody's door like back in the day, back in the year, I'm going to drop my resume off. You can't do that anymore. Not that you would. But, what has changed in the last year, maybe that you've taken advantage of? Like, maybe, hey, you know what? I try to do a Zoom call with, prospective recruiters or whatever, or, what is it that I'm doing differently to again, get one leg up on the competition? Because basically you're competing against, hundreds of thousands, if not, millions of people out there in different areas of work for work. So there's all kinds of different ways to approach them. So again, what have you done differently? How would you do it? If you were asking, or if I came to you looking for a job, reverse the table, what would you be looking for?
Yeah.
Those are just, again, situational based questioning, based on what you're looking for. It always comes back to you. You as the hiring person need to know what you're hiring for, what you want to see, how you'd like to see them grow. Other things I used to look at, John. And now, again, during the pandemic, it's not there. I know that personally I coached sports throughout my kids' upbringing. And I found that it made me a better manager to coach kids, because you get different personalities. You get the kids that are outgoing or really, really good. You get the kids that aren't very good and sitting on the bench. At the end of the day, it's your job to bring everybody up. So as a team, you collectively, everybody's contributing, and ultimately we're going to win as a team or we're going to lose as a team. Again, transition that to your hiring practices. Ask, hey, what have you done? Like, what's different now? Well, the person may come out to you and say, well, I didn't coach before. Now I'm coaching. Like, communication is always, it's easier to communicate if you've grown up playing team sports, and it doesn't need to be a sport. It could be, working together in different areas. It's really hard if you're an introvert. It's more difficult for that individual to communicate. Doesn't mean you don't hire them. It just means that you might have to work with them on getting them out of their shell over time and whatnot. So again, it comes back to the manager. What are you looking for? How do you bring it out of the person?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great points. And I like that. And you're right. You don't necessarily need to be a coach on a sports team, but even, working in a nonprofit, working as a volunteer in some of these organizations, and just getting that experience leading and managing people in a slightly different way is all going to transition back to corporate life, right? Like, if you can manage, right? Like, and now, one of the examples I've used a few times on some of these calls is, if you're a part of the Toastmasters organization, it's, one that's really done wonders for me personally. But, just being in that environment where you don't have a direct say over somebody's pay because everybody's a volunteer, and being able to manage and motivate and challenge and grow and, keep moving forward in terms of your objectives. Man, when you show up with those skills in a corporate environment, you're just going to be, you're going to be ahead of your competition. You're going to be able to show people, through live examples, this is what I've done with my team, and this is how we've been able to become a high performing team. So great example.
Sorry, John, not only that, Toastmasters, great example. You talked about, you gotta build your network. Well, guess what? You're out there, you're with people that are, trying to learn the same skills and help others, bring them along to develop those skills. Well, those individuals are in multiple corporations all over the place. Yeah. You're building your network through and learning. So it's not as if you're just reaching out and meeting people, and having, maybe lunch with them or a round of golf with them. You're actually learning and contributing and helping. And all the while you're building your network. That, somewhere down the road, somebody's going to say, hey, oh, wait a minute, John would be a great fit for this job. Let me see what he's doing. Let me see what he's up to. So again, it may not necessarily be you're looking for the job today, but it might be a job tomorrow that you're not even looking for that presents itself.
Yeah, no, and just like you said, that networking piece, right? It's not something, and I like that you mentioned that when you build a network, it's not necessarily for a particular moment or a particular situation. You're also building it for the long term, right? Like, and this is one of the things, and I'm so happy you said this, because it's one of the things that I'm constantly talking to the audience about is, don't build a network for just today, build it for tomorrow, build it out for the 5, 10, 15 years. because you never know what's going to happen, right? And just to be able to have a pool of people that you've built and established trust with, which when it comes to networking, it's one of the things you definitely got to have. But building that trust, and you do it over time, it's just going to make it easier when you get into other things. So, no, great. I'm really happy that you mentioned that. So as we start to wrap up, and I know we're pretty much at time here, but if people wanted to get a hold of you, or if people wanted to connect with you, how could they do that, Gino?
You know what, John? You and I, we talked about it from a LinkedIn perspective. I think my LinkedIn profile. So I used to call myself the traditional old guy. So I've got a lot to learn when it comes to, getting out and improving things. I would say right now, guys, I'm going to give you my personal email address. I know it's not the best way not the best way, but feel free if you want to, throw me an email. It's Moretti@Rogers.com. John, okay. I'm gonna look to you to help me with my LinkedIn profile over the next several weeks, and hopefully I can get that out for you guys. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to throw them out. I'll do my best to try to answer them if you have any.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, definitely. I'll definitely help you with your LinkedIn. I know a thing or two about that. And I'll, in the show notes, I'll make sure to include your email. You might be bombarded. So I'm letting you know that right now, because, 107 countries download this podcast. It's kind of pretty far reach. So, but I'll definitely share that out with everybody. Gino, I just wanted to say a big thank you, from the bottom of my heart, just a big thank you for being a part of this today and just sharing your insights with all of us. It's just been great to hear from somebody who's on the other side of the table, that brings in people into the organization, what they're looking for specifically, because that's what's going to give these candidates an advantage. And if they can prepare for those conversations, that's what's going to make them successful. So thanks again for taking the time to share your insights with all of us.
My pleasure, John. Anytime. And for everybody out there, keep listening to John. He's a great guy. He knows what he's talking about.
All right, everybody. So that wraps up this episode of the podcast. Wishing you all a great one. Talk to you all soon.